Hello. Thank you for joining us for our BC digital live stream. My name is Gen Lambert, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the province of BC. And every month we host a conversation about all
Jen,
things digital.
It's telling me it's not live. This event, the live.
Showing live for me.
Oh, is it showing live for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we host a conversation about all things digital. We talk to experts and digital leaders from all over the world, as well as right here at home in BC. And I'm joining you today from the beautiful Saanich, British Columbia, where I'm grateful to work and live on the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. This session is being recorded and it's live and posted online for an internal and external audience. You can turn on live captions at the bottom right side of your screen. And please do ask questions in the chat and upvote those you like. Your questions and comments are going to drive the conversation. I'll start with a few of my questions and then we'll get to yours as they come in. And if we don't get to all of the questions, we will follow up with a podcast with any of the other questions. So we'll get started. So I'm excited to welcome today Giles Turnbull all the way from the UK. Giles is a communication expert and helps organizations communicate clearly, creatively, and concisely. He was formerly part of the UK Government Digital Services creative team and has worked with lots of other UK government departments, local authorities, international governments, including the UN and other teams worldwide. And he is the author of the Agile Comms Handbook. So welcome, Giles. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us late in the evening on your side of the world.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, I'll get started with a few of my questions. I think this is going to be a great conversation. So I know that you help people use the human voice in communications. Many of us in government are used to writing documents that will be read. And I found it to be quite a hard transition when I started being asked to write things for other people to say, whether that is speaking notes or presentations or bullets that to send to executives so they can respond to questions. Do you have any advice on how to make that transition and how to hone those kinds of skills?
I think this begins where almost all other modern day civil service work begins. It begins with user needs. It begins with understanding what are the needs of the people that you are attempting to communicate with. What do those people need? And also, what do you need from them? What do you need them to understand or to know or to do? So in other words, a simpler way of putting this is to before any communication happens, to consider its purpose. Consider its purpose and get a clear answer to what is the purpose of this communication. Once you've pinned that down, and I do writing workshops with people who say, I'm a terrible writer, I'm really nervous about writing, I can't stand writing, or I open up Word or Google Docs and I just feel this incredible fear about filling up the blank page. And I say, it's because you haven't pinned down what your purpose is yet. You need to pin that down first and literally put it in a sticky note in front of your eyes and then write words to meet that purpose. And the purpose could be all sorts of different things, but generally, if you think about it for long enough, you will find one. Just a very quick example. I have recently been working with a media company, and the media company has a bunch of software teams and product teams making digital products and digital things on the internet. And their problem was that the senior leadership didn't have a clear idea of what the teams were doing, even though the senior leadership were constantly asking the teams for updates about progress. And the primary problem that I saw when I delved a bit deeper was that the updates were not the kind of thing that a senior leader can take in quickly and easily. So the teams needed to understand the user needs of their stakeholders a bit more clearly. They needed to grasp the fact that their stakeholders are incredibly busy people who don't have time. Even when they say, we will make time to read your documents, they actually don't. It's a lie. They never do that. So how do you meet those people's needs? There are various tactics that I think we will come on to as we talk further.
Okay, that's really helpful. So a lot of it is about sort of imagining your audience and as you're writing and thinking about what you communicate to them.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so my next question is around weak notes, and I know that this is something that you promote, and some of our teams in government have started to write weak notes. Can you tell us more about these and why you encourage people to write them?
Okay, continuing that example from the media company, and in fact this applies to, I'd say probably 70%, 80% of the clients that I tend to work with, especially the larger organizations. They always have an internal comms mechanism that always exists already, but it is a predominantly vertical mechanism. It works from the top down, and it helps leaders say things to the people who work for them. Great, wonderful, that needs to happen. But very rarely is there a built-in mechanism for team A to talk to team B, other than like setting up a meeting. Teams tend not to have the same sort of broadcast mechanism that leaders have. And that, I think, is the biggest flaw in most organizations when it comes to communication. Weak notes are a simple, quick, easy way to give a team a broadcast mechanism. You can say, if you are in charge and if you're a senior person and you say to your teams, we would like you to produce weak notes on a regular basis, and we will take away some of these other reporting mechanisms that perhaps these other hoops you have to jump through, we'll remove those, and instead we'll say to you, write us a weak note at least once a week. And this can work wonders because it lets the teams say things out loud to the widest possible audience in the organization, sometimes to audiences beyond the organization. That's a separate kettle of fish that we might have to go into later. But the point is, if a team can broadcast, they can say things that matter to them. But if all of the teams are broadcasting, then the stakeholders, the leaders, can move their attention from one team to another very, very easily. If everybody's broadcasting, it's like giving the leadership a remote control for the TV, and the leaders can flick the remote control and move their attention to where it's needed most. So say there's a team that's doing really, really well. Fantastic. I like reading their weak notes as a leader, but I probably don't have to worry about them for the moment. But over here, there's another team who are struggling. They're up against all sorts of blockers, or they've got all sorts of problems. I know this because I've read it for the last 3 weeks in a row from their weak notes. I know I need to divert my attention in that direction. I have 3 rules for weak notes. They're not rules, but I call them that because it's simple shorthand. So rule number 1 is every team should write a weak note on a regular basis. Weekly is brilliant. Fortnightly is okay. Once a month if it has to be, but every team should write something. Rule number 2 is nobody is required to read all of the notes from all of the teams. That's really important. It means that if you're a large organization and you've got 50 different teams or 50 different individuals all writing weak notes, well, that would be a full-time job to read them all. So it's nobody is going to be required to do that. And rule number 3 is all weak notes need to be published in a place where everyone can see them. Doesn't matter what it is or where it is, but everybody needs to be able to see them to give teams that broadcast system. It works wonders when it is put in place with rules like that governing the process. That's why I bang on so much about weak notes.
Oh, interesting. So there's a lot of governance then involved in that, is just sort of like how to structure it and how to make sure that it works properly is to have that kind of structure around it, not it just being loose. Yeah.
You need a little bit of structure. You need a few rules to make sure that people know why they're being asked to do this, because sometimes they grumble about it. And once they see the benefits, I think they stop grumbling generally.
Right. And going back to your answer to the first question, it's important to understand the audience for those week notes as you write them as well. Just all of those first
Absolutely.
rules apply to the second one as well.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we've got a question that has come in from the audience. So the question is, how do you overcome the resistance to plain language or to using the words that your audience uses? People are sometimes very invested in language that they see as right, even when their communications aren't working.
A fantastic question. Thank you, Emily, for asking that one. I'm sure many of the people watching this session are going to be familiar with the website that I used to be part of the team that worked on, gov.uk. Gov.uk, as some of you will probably have heard before, the content on gov.uk is written assuming an average reading age of 9 years old. So the language on gov.uk is written to be as simple as possible, even though it often communicates quite complex or complicated things, or things that are very, very important. Nonetheless, the language is written to be as simple and as accessible as it can possibly be achieved. And that word accessible is the most important thing there. Simpler language is more accessible language. And what's more, let's go back to those busy stakeholders that we were talking about. Busy stakeholders who need to hear what teams are doing are humans as well. Those busy stakeholders tend to be overwhelmed with meetings, overwhelmed with documents that they have to read, overwhelmed with facts that they are expected to keep in their head. And imagine yourself, if you are in charge of 20, 30 teams, all of them are reporting different things to you about progress and numbers and success rates and budgets and staff numbers and all of this stuff. You're not going to be able to keep all of that stuff in your head. This is a problem I see time and time again. Leaders who really, really want to help their teams, and they are struggling to keep it all in their head because it hasn't been written down in a way that they can easily take it in and memorize it. I would argue we shouldn't expect them to memorize it. We should instead give them tools that make it easy for them to find the information they need whenever they need it. So ideally, the performance metrics from a team or a program or a project should be on a web page that I can bookmark in my browser, so that every time I want to know what's that team doing again, I know they had a meeting with me a month ago and I can't remember what they said, I should be able to click a bookmark in my browser and remind myself and get up-to-date, accurate figures. So that's my answer to that one. Simpler language is better for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And self-service, I guess, for the folks that,
yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a question around empathy. It's asking about what steps we can take to foster empathy and active listening among our team members.
Wowzers. This goes back to the thing I said right at the very beginning, is putting yourself in your audience's shoes and understanding. So when you are talking to stakeholders, understanding that they are busy, they are overwhelmed people. When you are talking to, for example, let's go right to the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe interested members of the public. And there probably won't be very many of those, but often there's one or two who like to keep an eye on what the government's doing. Well, what are their needs? I would hazard a guess that very often their needs are reassurance, something like that, that they want to be assured that everything's okay. They want to know that public money maybe isn't being spent unwisely, all of that stuff. So trying to understand what those needs are in advance is a good approach to empathy. But there's a big but here, right? Anyone watching this who is a content designer will know that when you do content design, when you're writing words for digital services on the internet, you must start with a set of user needs. The problem when you're communicating about work is that you will very rarely have a set of user needs to respond to. So you have to do the thing that content designers are taught not to do. You have to guess. And that means that sometimes you will get it wrong. And that means that you have to be able to iterate your communication. And this is why I called my book the Agile Comms Handbook, plugging the book a bit. It's because good communication is able to iterate as it goes along based on feedback, based on rapid feedback loops from the people you're trying to communicate with. So if they didn't understand it the first time round, or if it didn't meet their needs, encourage them to tell you, encourage them to say, actually, that presentation you did was meaningless, or that article you put on the internet was too confusing. Give people ways to respond to you so that you can make it better next time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And repetition is always helpful as well, right? In getting the message across.
Yes.
So if you did it the first time and some of your audience it didn't connect, maybe a different way will connect as the next time as well.
Absolutely right.
So we've got a question here from somebody who is already doing week notes, and they're saying they're a firm believer now. And the thing that they find challenging is understanding if people are actually reading them. Some of their stakeholders are engaging with the updates, but many aren't. Is there any advice on how to engage people through week notes?
Partly repetition, as you just said, Jen. Partly seeking out responses, like giving people a feedback loop, like I was just describing, putting a line at the end of your week note, just on one particular week, saying, did you like this? Did you hate it? Was it a bit meh? Send us an email to this email address and give us one emoji. Like, don't make a big demand on your audience, but say, email us with one emoji, one of those, or, you know, one of those, something like that. It doesn't matter. One thing I would often say to people is not to worry too much about the metrics of page views and hits and stuff like that, because the numbers that you get from that are almost always going to be depressingly small. Because, you know, the government community is big, but it ain't that big. And if you base your success on the number of hits or the number of page views, you're probably going to think you failed, when you probably haven't, because it's more about influencing the right minds than lots and lots and lots of minds, or an increasing number of minds as time goes by.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And sometimes it's not a large audience you need to reach, it's a few key people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So folks have some good ideas around what about recording videos or audio updates instead of written week notes? How? Yeah,
I think both of those are a great idea. One of the things I'm a big fan of is what I call sprinkling a little bit of creativity on top of your communication about your work. And there is a very simple reason for doing this. It's the same reason that that TV shows pull you in and entice you and make you keep watching, because they are creative with the story that they are telling. I'm not advocating that you tell fiction. What I am advocating is that you use a little tiny bit of creativity when you're communicating in order to make people click that email or open that document. Because if you always communicate in the same ordinary, boring monotone, we are reporting our progress for the last quarter, then people are going to see that email in their inbox and they're going to think, do I have to read that? And your job when you're communicating is actually to make people say, yes, fantastic. There's an email from that team. I'm dying to hear what they've done this month or this quarter, because last month it was completely different to the month before that and the month before that. So a little tiny bit of creativity is brilliant, because it keeps your audience engaged. It keeps people wondering, well, what's next? I don't know. I'm dying to find out. Really quick example. There is a team at the House of Commons here in the UK. They are part of the House of Commons library, and they write week notes where they deliberately use wit and humour in order to make the week notes more enticing. Their goal is not to reach a very large audience. Their goal is to reach the right audience, but that audience, like all the audiences we've already talked about, is mainly incredibly busy, incredibly important people who otherwise probably wouldn't take the time to read the week notes. So this team deliberately peppers their week notes with gags. And it is a completely brilliant idea. It makes the week notes hilarious, And that is what makes people want to read them. Now, I'm not saying you have to fill your week notes with gags or your other communications with gags, but using a tiny bit of creativity like that is a really good tactic. It doesn't have to be humor. It could be something else. Video and audio, a little bit of those every now and again is a great idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess those week notes might be a fun thing to read on the train on the way home.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This is it. Yeah. Because you want people to want to read your stuff. So if you make it more entertaining, they're going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. So we're getting some folks asking about the audience that they're speaking to are executives and ministers unfamiliar with Agile, and they want to communicate progress without restricting their agility. So they want to communicate to that audience without, I guess, restricting or compromising their agility. Do you have any advice around that?
I'm not. Is this a question about the language of Agile? Or
it might be. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a tricky one, and it varies immensely from context to context. There are some teams in some organizations where using the language of Agile is probably quite a good idea because everybody knows what you're talking about. But not that long ago, I was working for a pretty large organization, again, multiple product teams working on multiple software things and data platforms and publishing platforms, all this sort of stuff. The next layer of management up were very confident and understood the language of Agile very well, so that was fine. But the layers of management higher up than that had no clue, absolutely no clue. They did not understand the language of Agile at all. And so there was this geological fault line in the communication that prevented clarity moving up. The clarity was getting as far as that, and it was hitting this barrier. And then above that, it was just sort of evaporating because the people very high up were reading these communications and going, what? I don't understand this. So for those teams, it was necessary for them to think differently and to communicate directly to that very high management layer in a different way, using different language. And for most of those teams, it ended up affecting their presentations because usually the mechanism for talking to those high up people was presenting at them. So what we did was we said, when you're presenting, you're not going to use the language of Agile anymore. You're going to talk about prototypes instead of alphas and betas, stuff like that, and change that language so that it's something everyone can use.
Mm-hmm. That is a really great segue into one of the other questions that I had before the session. A lot of our teams that practice Agile have open sprint reviews, and they invite their sponsors and other interested parties to attend. And sometimes we hear from attendees that some of the information they shared in the reviews wasn't at the level that they could understand. So what is your advice on balancing the value that sprint reviews have for the members of the team with the value from the broader audience? Or do you actually need two different kinds of reviews?
I would argue you probably do, depending, again, on the purpose. What is the purpose of the session? Who are you trying to talk to about what? What do you want them to understand or know or do? If you are inviting very, very senior but quite disconnected people, you probably need to give them something different. And unfortunately, that means more work. That means writing a different presentation or organizing a different event or writing a different document. But it's work that's worth doing in order to make get a simpler message across. Let me explain with an example. Scientists tend to write for other scientists in the language of academic papers. And anyone watching this who has done any kind of academia, like undergraduate or upwards, will know that the language of academia is incredibly detailed and hard to read and hard to write, let's face it, right? It's not designed for the rest of us. That language is designed for the actions of academia, where one paper cites other papers. That's what it's for. Scientists also are good at making TV documentaries. They don't read their academic papers in the documentaries. What they do is they make a much, much, much simpler version of the same story, and they tell it to you in an entertaining way. One of my favorite TV scientists is Mary Beard. She's a historian of the Roman Empire, and she understands everything about it. And she makes these lovely little easy Sunday evening documentaries, and you can watch one with a glass of wine, and you can learn about Rome without having to be a Roman academic. There was another one I encountered very recently, an astrophysicist called Skylar Grayson. There is a page of links. We'll put the link at the end for the page of links. And from that page of links, you can find Skylar Grayson. Skylar wrote a PhD about astrophysics, and I would bet money that nobody watching this call could read that paper and understand it. But she summed it up in 2 minutes flat on TikTok. With video. Now, if Skylar Grayson can sum up a multi-thousand word PhD in 2 minutes of video on TikTok, then any civil servant can sum up pretty much any complex topic in a similar way, I would suggest. It's possible, it's doable, it just takes a bit of more work.
Yeah, and practice probably.
And a bit of practice, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we are almost out of time, but before we go, do you have any, maybe your top website or piece of material that you would point us to? I know we're going to share some links afterwards as well.
There's my book, obviously, agilecomshandbook.com. You can find that. There's also this one, Content Design by Sarah Winters, is a really good book. It helps, it defines the subject of content design in a nice, accessible, easy sort of way. And there's one more thing, a website called doingpresentations.com. That's on the page of links that we will share. And doingpresentations.com is a website that I made with some friends, and it tells you how to do presentations in a really clear, simple, accessible way.
That sounds super useful and something that we all need to do all the time here. So this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that valuable information and inspiring all of us that are not already creating week notes to maybe give it a try. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us. I know that it is late in the day where you are. And thank you everyone else who's joined the call. We do have some questions that didn't get answered, so there will be a podcast that we're doing that you'll have access to in a few months. And so thank you so much. There's also a survey after this for folks that attended, and our next session is December 7th with Kate Tarling. And
I know Kate, she's great.
Yeah.
You'll enjoy that. Thanks for having me.
We've got some great speakers. Yes, thank you so much. This was great.
Bye.